Father Gabriel arrived on a mist-covered morning, the kind that made the church bell sound older than the stone it was built on. The village of Saint Harrow welcomed him with soft smiles, wrinkled faces, and eyes that lingered a little too long. The church stood like a relic from another era, tall, Gothic, with stained glass windows that bled red light when the sun passed just right. To Gabriel, it was perfect, a fresh start, his first true parish. He'd spent years preparing for this moment, and now, standing before the altar, he felt a sacred fire awaken in his chest. There was something holy in the stillness, something ancient. The children's choir was introduced to him that first Sunday, a dozen voices full of warmth and joy, led by bright-eyed kids from local families. Among them was Elias, a shy boy of 9 with a voice so clear it could make the Virgin weep. Gabriel praised them all, but Elias stood out, his tone pure, ethereal, untouched by fear or pride. The congregation whispered that Elias was a gift, chosen for something special. Gabriel smiled. He didn't believe in omens, not yet. That afternoon, after a particularly spirited rehearsal, Elias walked home with his parents. Nothing seemed unusual, but by the next morning he was silent. Not sad, not afraid, just silent. He didn't answer questions, didn't react, just stared at the walls with wide, glassy eyes. The local doctor found nothing wrong. No trauma, no fever, no reason. The family was desperate, but the village treated it like a passing fever. "Sometimes children get overwhelmed," said an old woman with sunken eyes. "He'll come back when he's ready." But he didn't. Days passed, then a week. Elias never spoke again. Gabriel visited the boys' home, heart aching. He spoke gently, prayed softly, even hummed hymns to draw him out. But the boy only blinked, slow and disconnected, as if the world had dimmed around him. Before leaving, Gabriel offered a blessing. As he turned to go, Elias did something strange. He began to hum, a melody Gabriel didn't recognize. Soft, haunting, distant. It lingered long after the door closed. Gabriel couldn't forget the sound. The tune Elias had hummed echoed in his head like a prayer he hadn't learned yet. Slow, off-key, almost sorrowful, but with something buried beneath it, something deliberate, the kind of melody that didn't fade, even after silence returned. That Sunday, he watched the children's choir with new eyes. They lined up as usual, neat robes, folded hands, innocent smiles. But when the music began, Gabriel noticed one of the girls, Clara, pausing mid-hymn. She tilted her head slightly, like listening to something just outside the walls. Then, without missing another beat, she joined the choir again, and hummed a note that didn't belong. It was the same note Elias had hummed. After the service, Gabriel approached Clara. She looked up at him with a blank calmness. "That melody during the hymn, where'd you learn it?" he asked. Her lips curled slightly. "We've always sung it," she replied. But Gabriel had combed through the hymn books. That melody didn't exist in any of them. It wasn't part of the service. It wasn't something they'd been taught. That night, uneasy, he began reviewing old recordings from past Sundays. Clara, Elias, and even 2 other children had occasionally hummed brief fragments of that same strange tune. Always faint, always tucked beneath the louder, official hymns. 3 days later, Clara stopped speaking. The pattern hit Gabriel like a cold wind. One child, then another, always after singing, always humming the same phantom melody. And each time, the silence came not like fear, but like surrender, as if something had called to them and they'd answered. He took his concern to the town council, but their reaction was strange, dismissive, evasive. "Kids go through phases," one man muttered. "You're not from here, Father," said another. "You don't understand how children are in Saint Harrow." They shifted in their chairs, eyes averted, words clipped. Gabriel pressed, but the conversation was over before it began. Later that evening, as he sat alone in the front pew, staring up at the towering crucifix, he heard it again, faint, a whisper of music drifting from the back of the church. Even though the building was empty, he turned slowly, heart pounding. There was no one there, only the echo of a hymn no one admitted to knowing. The next morning, before sunrise, Gabriel unlocked the church alone. The chill in the air felt sharper than usual, the kind that curled around your neck and settled deep in your bones. He moved through the sanctuary with deliberate steps, past the rows of pews, toward the old pipe organ looming at the rear. Something about the night before, the melody in the dark, the strange humming from the children, had drawn him here. He didn't know what he was searching for, only that the answer felt close. Closer than it had ever been. The organ hadn't been used in years. Dust lay thick on the keys. Beneath it, nestled in a carved wooden compartment, Gabriel noticed a small brass latch nearly hidden from view. It was locked. He hesitated, then fetched the church's old ring of keys, a dozen of them, rusted and forgotten, and tried each one until, with a heavy click, the latch gave way. Inside was a single book, thin, worn, bound in cracking leather. It wasn't labeled like the other hymnals. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, most of them blank. But near the center, one solitary page held writing, music notation scrawled in ink that had bled into the paper like veins. The title at the top read, "To He Who Listens Beneath." No composer, no notes, just the title and the melody. Gabriel didn't recognize the language of the footnotes, a script that curled and twisted like vines strangling the margins. He placed the book on the organ stand. A sense of dread pressed against his chest, but his hands moved anyway, as if compelled. He played the first chord, then another. The notes were slow, dissonant, not quite right, but hypnotic. As he continued, the air in the church shifted. The shadows seemed to lean forward. A low moan of wind stirred, though no windows were open. The flame in the sanctuary lamp flickered violently, and the cross above the altar groaned against its chains. Then the dogs began howling. From the town below, a rising chorus of barks and wails erupted all at once, echoing through the hills like a warning. Gabriel froze mid-note. Silence returned like a falling curtain. His breath was shallow, his skin damp with sweat. Something had changed. Something had heard him. That Sunday, 5 more children fell silent. No illness, no cause. Just the same wide eyes, the same vacant stares, the same terrifying calm. Gabriel returned to the book that night, searching for a clue, but the page had darkened. The notes looked freshly inked, as if the music had only just been written. He tried to close the hymnal, but his hands trembled. Outside, he swore he heard the tune again. Not played, not hummed, whispered from the ground beneath the church. Gabriel no longer slept. At night, he sat in the church with only candlelight and dread to keep him company. The hymn book stayed locked in a drawer now, but it didn't matter. The melody lived in his mind, crawling into the quiet like ivy through stone. Every hour he stayed awake, another question rotted at the back of his thoughts. What is it that the children are singing? And who are they singing it to? Desperate for answers, Gabriel sought out the only man who had lived in Saint Harrow long enough to remember what others wouldn't say aloud. Emery, the church's caretaker. A hunchback figure with ash-colored hands and eyes that had seen too much. Gabriel found him oiling the iron gates near the graveyard and demanded the truth. At first, Emery refused to speak. But Gabriel pressed, not with authority, but with fear. Real, honest fear. That finally loosened the old man's tongue. "There was a choir once," Emery whispered, glancing toward the church as if afraid it could hear. "A long time ago. Children, just like now. They practiced in that same loft. Sang just as sweet, until they were told to learn a hymn that no one remembers writing. The choir master said it came to him in a dream. They sang it at a midnight mass. Only once." Gabriel's breath hitched. "What happened?" "No one ever heard their voices again," Emery muttered. The next morning, the choir was gone. Every child vanished. Not a sound, not a trace. All we found was blood in the shape of a spiral beneath the altar. And the townsfolk, they didn't question it. They buried the memory like they buried the bodies from the plague that came after. Gabriel's eyes widened. "Plague." "Aye," Emery nodded. "That church was built on top of a mass grave. Over 100 souls, buried hurried and deep. Victims of a sickness no one dared name. That hymn, it's a call. It wakes what sleeps below. Every time it's sung, it spreads. First the voice, then the will, then the soul. Gabriel felt the truth settle into him like ice. The melody wasn't just a curse. It was a ritual, a rite the children were performing unknowingly, piece by piece, until something ancient was fully summoned. He ran back to the church. His first instinct was to destroy the hymn book. He grabbed it from the drawer, pages fluttering as if alive in his grip. But as he held it over the flame of a candle, he paused. He could hear the melody again, but this time not from outside. It was inside him, in his mouth, in his breath. A soft hum, unbidden. He dropped the book, hand shaking. It didn't burn. Outside, the church bells rang without touch. Something had begun, and it would not stop on its own. The change came slowly, like dust creeping in beneath a locked door. Gabriel could feel in the villagers' eyes the stillness, the unnatural calm, the way they smiled a little too long, the way they never spoke of the children anymore, not even when Clara stood motionless in the market square for an hour, staring at nothing. The town moved around her as if she weren't even there, as if they had learned to stop seeing what frightened them. The children were no longer just silent. They were synchronized. They walked in pairs, never alone. They blinked in rhythm, and at night they sang, not with voices, but in sleep. Gabriel would walk past homes and hear it. That same eerie, fragmented melody drifting through windows. Parents didn't notice, or they pretended not to. Some even started humming it too, unknowingly. The song was no longer just a melody. It had become a presence, creeping into the town like smoke. One evening, Gabriel watched as a mother gently rocked her baby to sleep while mouthing the words to a hymn that had no words, her eyes glassy with something between peace and possession. He had to end it. Returning to the church alone, he descended beneath the altar, deeper than he'd ever gone. The lower chambers were cold, wet with old condensation, and lit only by the flicker of his lantern. Beneath the floorboards, behind a rotting wooden panel, he discovered a hidden stairwell, spiral and steep, leading down into darkness. It hadn't been touched in decades. At the bottom lay a forgotten crypt, carved into black stone. The air was dense and wrong. Gabriel's breath came heavy. Bones lined the walls in careful arrangements. And in the center, surrounded by melted candles and blood-stained symbols, was an ancient, cracked slab, an altar older than the church itself. Above it, a message was scrawled in Latin, but Gabriel recognized the words even before he translated them. He listens where the living forget. The whispering began as soon as he approached. Not voices from above, but from below the slab. Children's voices, singing, as if trapped beneath stone, as if buried. The melody rose with them, no longer fractured, no longer faint. Now it was full, strong, layered in harmonies that did not belong to human throats. Gabriel dropped his knees and began to pray, but his words came out warped. The hymn fought his thoughts. The melody had rooted itself in his mind. His lips moved without permission. He opened his mouth and hummed. In that moment, he realized something crucial. The hymn book had never needed to be sung aloud. It only needed to be remembered. The tune was a vessel, and now it had him. With a burst of panic, he tore himself away and stumbled up the stairs, collapsing behind the altar. His head rang. His ears bled. The church was empty, but he could feel the weight of something beneath it, alive and waking. He grabbed the hymn book, fled to courtyard, and tried again to set a light. The fire caught, but extinguished itself with a gust of cold wind. Not natural, not earthly. Then, from inside the sanctuary, he heard footsteps, dozens of them, marching in time. The choir had arrived early. The doors of the church creaked open on their own, slow and solemn, like the opening to a ceremony that had waited centuries to begin. Gabriel turned to see them. The children, all of them, silent, pale. Their robes were too white, glowing almost blue under the moonlight pouring through the stained glass. Clara stood at the front, her head tilted back ever so slightly, lips parted though no sound came out yet. The others followed behind her, step for step, as if moved by a single breath, a shared heartbeat. They weren't alone. Behind them, the villagers began to file in, quiet, empty-eyed. some with candles, others with nothing. Their faces bore the same distant peace Gabriel had come to dread. A crowd without thought, a congregation without soul, and all of them looking to him, as if waiting for direction. Gabriel backed away from the altar, clutching the hymnal, his fingers trembling. It felt heavier now, pulsing in his hands. The book was open. The melodies stared back at him from a page like an open wound. "This isn't worship," he whispered. "This is surrender." Clara stepped forward. She raised one hand slowly, and on cue, the children opened their mouths and began to hum. Soft, unified. The notes were low at first, vibrating through the pews and floorboards. Gabriel felt the stone beneath his feet begin to tremble. The crucifix above the altar swayed gently, as though rocked by breath. With each measure, the sound grew louder, richer, impossibly layered. It was no longer a song. It was a summoning. "No," Gabriel muttered. He ran to the organ and slammed the keys, hoping to drown out the sound, to distort the harmony. The instrument shrieked in protest. Pipes hissed, but the choir did not stop. They grew stronger, and beneath them, the foundation cracked. The altar split down the center with a deafening crack, a red light pulsing up through the floor. Dust exploded through the nave. The villagers didn't flinch. They kept singing, not just the children now, everyone. Gabriel screamed, but no one heard. From the fissure beneath the altar, a shadow began to rise. Not smoke, not fire, something darker. It had no form, only movement, a presence shaped like agony. The hymn had opened the gate, and what listened below had answered. Gabriel, desperate, lifted the hymnal again, but this time he didn't try to burn it. He turned the back page, where empty parchment stared at him, with the blood from his palms. He began to write, a counter hymn, a prayer of silence, words he didn't know he knew, notes he'd never studied. He sang. The melody clashed violently with the hymn. The walls shook, windows shattered inward. Children clutched their heads. Clara screamed, the sound distorted, not her voice at all. Gabriel pressed on, his voice raw, shouting the notes as the dark thing writhed at the center of the church. Then light, a blinding flash. The red glow vanished. The shadow recoiled, shrieking into the split altar before being dragged back beneath the stone. The hum ceased. Silence fell like ash. The children collapsed. The villagers blinked as if waking from a long sleep. Gabriel stood in the rubble, breathing heavy, the hymnal finally still in his hands. He had closed the gate, or so he thought. The church stood in eerie quiet the morning after. Sunlight filtered through the broken stained glass in thin, muted rays. The sanctuary was a mess of shattered pews, fractured stone, and scorched candle wax, as if heaven and hell had fought to draw and left the battlefield behind. Gabriel moved through the wreckage with slow, cautious steps. Every sound felt too loud. Every creak beneath his feet echoed like footsteps from somewhere else. The children were safe. Or, at least, they were breathing. Parents wept with relief. Some claimed they remembered nothing. Others refused to talk at all. Clara had been the last awake. Her eyes were clearer now, but she didn't speak. She only watched Gabriel as if waiting for him to say what they both knew. It wasn't over. He buried the hymnal. Deep in the woods, where the roots grew twisted and old, Gabriel dug a pit and placed the book inside. It had gone silent. No pulsing, no whispers, no warmth. Just pages and ink. But he didn't trust silence anymore. He covered it with salt and stone, then crossed himself, whispering, "May no ear ever hear it again." Weeks passed. The town returned to routine. Choir practice was suspended indefinitely. The organ was sealed. And Father Gabriel continued his sermons, his voice lower, his eyes darker. People said he looked older. He felt it, too, not in his body, but in his soul, as though part of him had stayed behind the crack beneath the altar, trapped to the thing he had driven back. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake in a sweat and hear the melody again, faint, distant, not from beneath the floor, but from behind the walls. A single note, then silence, then nothing. He began to notice things, small, unsettling signs. Clara's drawings, once colorful, now showed only black spirals and red crosses. One of the younger choir boys whispered in his sleep, words in the strange language Gabriel had seen in the hymn book margins. The sanctuary lamp flickered, even when no draft could reach it, and once, just once, he found a new page in his Bible. It hadn't been there before. Blank parchment, tucked neatly between the Psalms, waiting to be written on. Gabriel closed the book and stared at the altar. Beneath it, the stone had been sealed, blessed, and reinforced. But he knew better than most. Some things don't stay buried. They wait for the next choir, for the next voice, for the next priest with ears too curious and a heart too kind. And somewhere in the roots of Saint Harrow, a melody hummed again, not loud, not yet, just enough for the ground to remember, just enough for the silence to crack.